Well, good evening. So just so you know, to be really clear, I do work for the county. I have a fascinating title. I am the administrator of the LA County Regional Park and Open Space District. I also have I have a couple of titles, but I also am a regional operations manager for the Department of Park and Rec for the County of LA. I don't want to talk about carbon. I think she's going to be better. This would be me. So in 1992, you all, the voters of LA County, approved something called Prop A. And what Prop A did was it created the Open Space District, which is a very unique legislative body. It includes all 88 cities and the county, and it was only created to be a granting agency. It doesn't hold land, it doesn't operate land, it grants funds to park projects. So the voters approved that district's creation and a tax. It was a benefit assessment, but it was a tax. And then in 1996, again, you all voted again yes for, well, the majority of you, maybe not all of you, the majority of the citizens of LA County approved the second Prop A, sometimes called Baby A. So when we look at local park funding, I'm a little shorter than him. When you look at Prop A, so there was Prop A, and that's what the old was. That's the one we're still paying for parks out of. It was not equitably spent across the county. It was actually created, and it showed very specific projects. So, like it had, I'm just going to paraphrase, $25 million for the Hollywood Bowl, $9 million for acquisition of hills in Whittier, the Whittier Hills. There was all different cities had different projects. And there may have been, excuse me, I didn't look them up, in the city of Santa Clarita, because I think it was just probably a city or coming to be a city at that time, money for projects. Not every city got a project. Not every project got money. But, and quite frankly, a lot of the money went to the west side, to the Santa Monica Mountains, to those who were really engaged in the idea of funding parks. Measure A is a little different beast. It is about funding the entire county, we'll say some funding for the entire county, and if you all were involved in the needs assessment that the county did in the last year and a half, it actually is written to meet what was identified in the needs assessment. So on July 5th, well, a year ago August, the board asked the Open Space District to develop a measure to meet the needs assessment to fund Park and Rec, because the 92 and 96 measure were on the ballot for a 22-year tax. I don't know why 22 years, but a 22-year tax. And so the 92 has sunsetted or expired and is no longer being collected. The 96 is currently being collected, and I understood some people got their property bills recently. You will see on your county tax bill something that says Regional Park and Open Space District. On my personal tax bill, mine is about $7.60. It's a little bit different. It's a funny formula. I can't say that your property is the same as mine, and it's based on the entire property and the use of the property. So it's got this weird formula. It's not intuitive. So as we worked on the needs assessment that gathered all the data, and as we learned at what worked in Prop A and what didn't work in Prop A, and what were the things that would work today in LA County, we drafted a measure. The board took up the measure. We did some outreach to stakeholders. We looked at some of the businesses. We talked to many of the people who were active in the needs assessment. Talked to many of the city staff about, what kind of things they would want to see in the new measure. Obviously, the supervisors were very much upfront in that, because you can't do something when they direct you to do it without talking to them. My goal was not ever to have a supervisor know my name. They know my name. That's not a good thing, you guys. So what they did on July 5th was put the measure. We put it forward to them as a draft, and they made some changes, and they put it on the ballot July 5th. So it's on the November 8th ballot. Then it got a name, and it's called Measure A, well, a letter. So the framework for Measure A is this. It's a parcel tax. It is based on the square footage of the buildings on the property. Not the square footage of the parcel, the square footage of the building on the property. It's set at 1.5 cents per square foot. If you have a 1,500 square foot home, which I think not many people up in the Helena Valley do, but $22.50 is what it would cost annually if it was approved. It will bring in $94.5 million annually. The expenditure plan was written to meet the needs assessment, and we'll talk about that in more detail here. And there's one exemption. The open space district as a special district is allowed to have a welfare exemption, which we then wrote in, which allows nonprofits who own property for the purposes of their nonprofit to have an exemption from this tax. It's an IRS tax test. So like a nonprofit hospital that owns its property to build a hospital would not pay this tax. A nonprofit school that operates its land for the purposes of the school, or a church for the purposes of the church, would not pay this tax. There is not a senior exemption. I actually wrote one in. I had to have it taken out because special districts cannot put a senior exemption in. We're not allowed to do that. The county can do that. What the special district can't. So these are the magic 75 words. I think you all might have your sample ballots by now. Hopefully you'll see this will look familiar. What I learned about 75 words is they're nonsensical when it comes to English. These 75 words are the highlights of the measure. It's about a 25-page resolution, which is also included in your sample ballot this time. And these 75 words are supposed to give you both the what legally it will do. It will charge 1.5 cents. The county can bond the money. The LA, who's going to tax, so the open space district is taxing, and then what it's going to do. These are kind of the highlights. So what will Measure A fund? Should it be passed by 2/3, it needs a supermajority. It'll be refurbishment, improvements to current parks and new parks, beaches, and additional acquisition of open space. Funds go into each study area. In the needs assessment, there are 188 study areas in the county. The city of Santa Clarita, I believe, I didn't look this up, I don't know if they had 2 or 3 study areas, maybe 4. And money will go back in each study area, not to the city as a whole, but into each study area. And then study areas that were identified as high and very high need will get additional funding as well. So how's it going to fund it? There's categories, but there are allocations to every study area. There's allocation to maintenance funds to each of the cities and some of the other park agencies, and there's competitive grants. So this is the magic graph, which I know you all have probably only seen it this time, but I've seen it way too many times. And what the goal is to create categories where you could identify where the funding would go. The largest category is 35%. It goes back to that's the amount that goes back to each study area. The 15% is the amount that goes back into the maintenance and servicing for each of the cities. Well, and the county park agency and beaches and harbors, let's be honest, not only cities. And then that's 50% of the funds, so 50% of the funds go back locally. They're allocated to the city, well, in the case of the agency who oversees the study area for parks. They will not have to go to the board to get their grants approved. There will be an administrative process to do it, because the board was clear. We don't want to approve all these grants and what these cities are doing. However, we do want an administrative process that ensures that they follow the guidelines of legislation and the needs assessment, because that was the point here. Then there are there's a category 2, which is 13%, which is the allocations that go back to the areas of very high and high need. And then there are 3 competitive grant programs. There's watershed. I see him used to look to the side. He's fancy. He's got it in the front. There is watershed, beaches, open spaces, so kind of the big, broad category. The second category will be regional recreational facilities and multi-use trails and accessibility. And the last program, which is the smallest program, is a youth and veteran job training program. In Prop A, you may not know this, but there was a youth employment element. Every project was supposed to employ youth. When you're building a pool, it's very hard to employ youth. So the intention was good, but didn't quite do it. So this will allow us to help fund summer programs for some of the cities that have work programs for youth and young adults. There are programs like the Conservation Corps to actually give grants to their programs that create education and job skills and then actually get people into jobs. And that's something that was missing with the old one. And the red category there, which everyone likes to point out to me, 7.2% goes to the district to do one thing. Well, not one thing. The first major thing is to run itself. The district, by legal requirement, has to leave the county whole. We have to fund ourselves. We're pretty efficient right now. There's 20 people at the county. We run on roughly $5 million. And the rest of the money of the 7.2 will go to program implementation. I think there's some innovation and some new interesting things we can do with electronics. I mean, here you guys are pretty sophisticated. You're going to put this up on YouTube. Well, not very many park agencies are using YouTube or the electronic media very well, so it's hard to get things done like pay for your tickets. So to get some of those things done. This is the map of the needs assessment, and when we talk about the very high and high need areas, on this map it's the red and orange ones. Out of 188 study areas, 43 are identified as very high and high. As you can see, as we get up on this portion of the county, there are very few high need areas. It has to do with density, population, number of parks, and the pressure on those parks. So let's talk about the comparison of Measure A and Prop A. Prop A, tax for 22 years. It was a one-time allocation. All the funds were bonded and then allocated out. So per parcel, there was $110 million that went back to the cities. With maintenance and servicing, there was $279 million that went back to the cities. And they're still using that money today. Some cities use a little bit at a time. Some cities have used it, or agencies have used it as it's come in against it's to maintain and operate the projects that have been funded. And so with the new measure, with the 2016 measure, the annual allocations, because there's this annual allocation, because on July 5th, the supervisors also took out the sunset date, so it goes on in perpetuity. It is a tax that never ends. The annual allocation is $32 million for Category 1, which is the majority of the 35%, and then the maintenance and servicing is $10.5 million. So if we compare the 22 years, not that one's going to end at 22 years, but to look at the same amount of money. Locally, $707 million will come back locally, and you'll have a little bit less for M&S. And the reason you'll have less for M&S is when M&S was allocated to each city, those accounts are held like trust funds for each of those cities to then invoice against. Interest on those funds were kept in those accounts. So cities who didn't use their money, and many of them didn't use it for 5 or 10 years, that money accrued. And they actually, in the 2000s, there was a lot of interest on stuff. And the county's a really good finance organization, so they did very well on interest. So what we are allowed to do as a county and the open space district is to inform and educate, which is part of what I'm doing here. And what you may have seen, if you are online, is there was $900,000 a board allocated to produce an information education program. Most of that's going into Facebook and Google ads and that kind of stuff. It is not going into any kind of mailers because that's a little much to the edge of advocacy or non-advocacy. So this is the program we have going. And you may have seen these if you're online. Maybe you haven't. It's a random thing. I've found some really interesting things on that, not seen that. So I'm open for questions at this point. I'm happy to answer any questions. I don't advocate. I'm not going to say no or yes, but I'm happy to answer any questions you have. The one numbers I did bring with me, not on my slides, is that the annual allocation for the city of Santa Clarita will be $702,000 a year for Category 1, and then for maintenance and servicing it'll be $169,000 a year is the estimate. So that that's what the city will be seeing annually. For 22 years, it's $19 million for Category 1, and under Prop A, that same number was a little over $6 million. The city has benefited from excess funds that were the last set of funding that we were just now allocating from Prop A is all that interest that was accrued on the capital money became discretionary to the supervisors. It was divided by 5. Supervisors just today allocated $32 million. We're almost done allocating excess funds. We have about $49 million left to allocate. 2 years ago, we had $100 million to allocate. But with supervisors leaving office, as you can imagine, they're spending their money on projects in their communities, which is a good thing. So I'm open for questions.
We get assessed tax on our property bill. The props, are they like the direct assessment added to the property tax?
Yeah, this measure would be a direct assessment added to your property tax. Measure M is different. This is a parcel property tax.
And and it's going to be voted in November 8th,
Right.
and it takes 2/3
Yes.
majority to have it passed.
Yes, sir.
Okay.
Jane, just for Doug's benefit as well, does this property tax apply to manufactured homes?
Yes, it would because manufactured homes are on land, and if they sit on the land and they have a parcel tax from the county, they will get taxed on it.
But the land, you said, is not going to be taxed.
No, but it's the building on the land. So you're getting a parcel tax bill already, so it'll be the square footage of your home.
But the landowner...
Yeah, see, there's a difference here, yeah.
The landowner has a clubhouse or an
Right.
office,
He,
and that's what he's going to get direct assessment taxed on.
directly, that's exactly right.
And then the independent homeowners are going to get an independent bill just on the square footage of their house.
Yes. And if you were a business and you have many floors, it's all the square footage of that floor.
Well, Jane, I thought that it said that commercial buildings were excluded.
All private property will be taxed. Public property will not be taxed, like they are not currently taxed, but all private property, yes, commercial buildings will be, in fact, that's where most of the taxes will come from if you think about LA and a 50-story building.
Okay. So commercial, it's only governmental-owned structures that won't be taxed.
Exactly. So schools and a nonprofit owns its land for the purpose of a nonprofit. Sometimes nonprofit own land not for the purpose of their nonprofit.
Okay, plus a couple of exceptions that you
Right,
have.
there's just those exceptions, but correct.
Anybody got any other question?
That's correct.
Just one last question. In the coloring from red to green, where does Santa Clarita fall?
Wait, tell me again.
Well, you showed a map that said you had red where there was a
Oh, it's the need of Santa Clarita. Santa Clarita is going to be, is there a little red light? Oh. Santa Clarita is going to be up here, right? As we come around the corner. This is the Angeles. So you guys are like up in here. There's no orange. I'll tell you. You are not a high need. Your community, as we were talking about before, you all do have an open space district that you all in the city fund. It's a tax that you all pay. And the city has been a very good city at finding all kinds of money, not just your open space money, but Prop A money and state park bond money to buy land and improve the parks. This is, as a city going after grants, the city is a good city at that. I can't say more about it than that, but I can tell you that.
I understand what you're saying. I think the city of Santa Clarita has a substantial amount of open space and trails. Active parkland, they're really short of. So it was just that's one of the reasons why I asked the question.
Well, and I think that what the opportunity is as far as when you go to administer this money and its allocations, the needs assessment did a public meeting. And actually Santa Clarita is a place that didn't do its public meeting. And there's not even a handful that didn't do a public meeting. There are like 3 that didn't do a public meeting. And the city provided a list. In the administrative purposes, we'll have to create a procedural guide and we'll have a lot of stakeholders. It'll take about a year to do, but I am going to put in a public meeting before they put out, should this pass, because it may not pass, but should it pass, before the city says, hey, we want to build a XYZ or we want to buy land for XYZ, we're going to require them to do a public meeting. And we are going to require them to do a public meeting so that at least you all are aware, can be on record for what is that project and can you affect change in what projects they're putting forward. Because I think that's at the heart of what we were trying to do with the needs assessment, was to get public input and to have public have a say in their parks.
Should this not pass, what would happen? Apparently, a lot of things would not be constructed, but where would maintenance for
Well,
everything comes?
the maintenance money that is flowing right now the 92 money has stopped flowing, so whatever's so 15% of I think we're at $30 million a year comes in from what's left for the next 2 years for the 96. That will stop. This money was to fund the Prop A project, so it's like the city has a maintenance budget and this is on top of it. So it goes away. But also what goes away is what I found out is how much of the capital money that parks have used over the last 20 years, this has been it. The cities haven't really put capital money into pools and gyms and parking lots and lights, and this money is very flexible that way. It doesn't just buy open space and, native plants and stuff like that. It actually gets down to bathrooms and playground equipment and stuff like that. So it will go away. And just so you all know, it'll take me about 8 years to wrap up the district, make sure that all the projects that have been allocated are completed and done, and leave one person, because in Prop A it says you must maintain and operate in perpetuity, that as open space or for recreational purposes. It doesn't have to be the same recreational purposes, but it must be held in perpetuity. So I have a responsibility to ensure that there's enough money for somebody to stay on to keep track of all those projects. So if it doesn't happen, the district doesn't go away because legally the district will still exist, but the funds for the district will go away. Okay. Yeah, I got you all to silence.
Thank you, Jane. I think that
Thank you.
that explained it quite well.
Thank you.